Okay. Yeah, I'm Sabrina. I'm a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University, and I'd like to thank all my co-authors on this paper who helped me with the project, the Table on Table project, including my PhD advisors, Wakkary, Peter Paul Verbeek, my colleagues at Simon Fraser University, Odom, Henry Lin, Matt Dalton, Markus Schilling, formerly at Simon Fraser University, Audrey Desjardins, now at UW, and Gijs Boer from University of Twente. To begin, I'd like to give you an overview of this paper. And what we did. So we crafted the Table on Table, which is a design research artifact that inquires into non-utilitarian aspects of human-technology relations. And then over the course of 4 years, which wasn't really planned that way, we studied it through different field deployments. And at the end of this lengthy period, we framed the Table on Table as a postphenomenological inquiry, which means that in our view, we drew on postphenomenology to productively frame our research to design inquiry and give precision and language to non-utilitarian notions of human-technology relations of the Table on Table. However, this tidy description that we came up with of the relations between theory, in this case postphenomenology, and our thing, the Table on Table, was in reality a process of a lot of trial and error, struggles, methodological challenges, and shifting assumptions and theoretical positions. So in our paper, we really wanted to focus on that and give an honest account of our practice and struggles within that practice. And lastly, it's worth mentioning that this work is part of an ongoing process and endeavor of exploring alternatives to user-centered design that move beyond purely functional understandings of design. So to briefly frame this work, and there's more about this in the paper, design-oriented research in HCI has increasingly migrated towards theoretical perspectives to understand the implications of newly crafted technology in everyday life. However, in this context, the relations between theory and understanding the things that we make are not always clear, especially the degree to which the nature of the research artifacts is revealed through or determined by theory. More than not, we're presented with end results in these cases that are illustrated there, removed from a lot of the vagaries of the design practice, bound to the making or imported theories that emerge in the design practice. We believe it's important to look under the hood of the correlation of theory and things in the practice of design research, and also to look at the messy interplay between theoretical groundings, the making of things, and design researchers in the service of creating new knowledge. So as a step in this direction, we offer in our paper a reflexive account of the Table on Table and a series of iterative deployment studies. And this long-term process with a single designed artifact allowed us to critically reflect on how theory and practice were mutually informing within our RTD approach. So what is this thing that we made, you may ask? The Table on Table. It is a table-like structure, very low to the ground, very heavy, approximately 25 kilograms or 50 pounds. It's made of approximately 1,000 sheets of stacked paper of common stock. The paper sits on an aluminum chassis, and the chassis holds the paper about half an inch from the ground, giving it a floating appearance. And inside the chassis is a motor hidden. This is what the chassis looks like without the paper on it. When plugged into an electrical outlet, the Table on Table moves very slowly and only 1 to 2 times randomly per day for less than 10 seconds. To give you a little bit of a taste what that sounds and looks like, although actually the movement is a little bit less, just for the sake of the video, we just didn't want to wait 12 hours. So what can be said about the methodological approach behind the Table on Table? We see the Table on Table as a material speculation, which is our own methodological approach to research to design. It centers on the crafting of a counterfactual artifact that is designed to contradict something normally considered logical in order to carefully and precisely inquire into the lived with reality with this artifact and aligning research questions. So our goal in designing the table on table was to create a technological artifact that would divert from utilitarian assumptions of technologies and design, while retaining subtle design qualities that could enable it to find a place in everyday life. So we tried to make it weakly familiar, for example, by using paper. However, even the format is uncommon, and as a table it's very low, and well, it moves whenever it does, which is a functionality, it's just not in the service of human use. So while avoiding specific use goals in our design, we still aim to craft the artifact in an intentional and purposeful way to give it a finished quality. So with the table on table, we set out to inquire into how this radically unique thing could become part of domestic settings. And in this, methodological and epistemological challenges became a central concern in the inquiry, and as did the refinement of our research aim. So over the trajectory of 4 years, which wasn't planned, like I said, we conducted 3 study series. In the first one, we explored the table on table in a rather thing-oriented way to see how people could relate to it, how it would find a place in a home. In a second series, we investigated how the table on table could relate to other things through the concept of fit and lived with experiences. But essentially, we were trying to understand and capture qualities of experience beyond interaction. So we also looked at how the table on table relates to other things. And in the third series, we investigated more relational and mediation aspects to understand broadly how the table on table constructs the world from a philosophical point of view. So I'm going to give you a glimpse at the specific study series and iterative stages of our design research process, but there's a lot more detail in the paper. In the first series, the theoretical notion of everyday design and concepts from theories of social practice, which also informed the design of the table on table, also shaped our first deployment series. Our approach was to literally just leave the table on table in a place with people and see what happens. So we first placed the table on table for a few days into the living rooms of 2 homes of members of our research groups, and then they took photographs and we later looked at them. And as a second thing-oriented deployment, we put the table on table into the home of a participant couple without much explanation other than telling them to live with it and share their experience on a private blog. We didn't interview them, and we didn't engage with them any further on what they reported. They had a cat, which became a star in our study, that immediately began investigating the table on table. And the cat engaged with the paper, ripping and chewing it, and using it even as a bed. And the cat's playful interactions with the artifact actually invited our participants to use the paper themselves. For instance, they made paper snowflakes. So for us, the table on table here found a place in the different homes and was taken into several domestic practices by our participants. And with that, we were actually briefly satisfied. However, soon later, we wanted to know more about the subtle aspects and relations coming about through the table on table in these domestic settings. And we began to investigate the notion of fit and the incremental process and its incremental process as a concept for research artifacts in the home. Through this, we then felt the need for a more thorough account of the lived with experiences around the table on table, because we wanted to better understand the table on table beyond interaction and its relations to other things. Ethnography is what we knew could get us there. So, informed by Alexander's notions of goodness of fit and unself-conscious cultures, we inquired into the fit or relations of the table on table through lived with experiences, using established HCI-oriented ethnographic methods. We deployed it in 3 households, and again, there's much more detail in the paper about the protocol But in short, we did interviews and also had the participants report on blogs. There's a lot to report about the findings, but in summary, all participants spent a considerable amount of time with the table non-table and engaged with it in different scenarios. But across all households, there was an initial phase of excitement, followed by an exploration centered on use, and a reflection whether or not the artifact fits in their homes. And then the latter stages could entail frustration over not being able to make sense of it, and then simply putting the table non-table aside or out of the way and not further engage with it. And to us, that made us think, does that mean it doesn't fit? And it prompted us to think about our methodological approach and consider if it entailed a focus too much on the human. The way our participants tried to make sense of the artifact was through use-centric explorations and thoughts around it, and this was problematic given the way the table non-table was designed. However, on a theoretical and conceptual level, at that point, this generated insights into nuances around the table non-table in a home, among other things. So at that point, we put the table non-table simply back in our research studio. We left it there. It was plugged in, so we kind of lived with it there. And during that time, we migrated towards exploring postphenomenology, and this was due to several happenings. Including that I personally got really interested in this philosophical school of thought, and I had picked this as my dissertation topic, and we had engaged in other projects where we were starting to use it, and more broadly, HCI developments had also recently started using this framework. So briefly, postphenomenology has emerged as a contemporary and empirically oriented strand of philosophy of technology to understand the social and cultural roles of technologies in human existence and experience. And the post-phenomenological approach sees technology as transformative mediators of human-world relations, rather than as separated functional or instrumental objects or alienating entities. So a migration towards this philosophical perspective shifts the emphasis of design research to explore the relations between humans and things rather than human behavior or qualities of things. And this seemed promising for the table non-table study. So informed by post-phenomenology, we then wanted to explore the relations and mediations of the table non-table. And for this, we first stuck with our previous ethnographic way of studying the table non-table in participant households and through direct engagement with participants. And we let post-phenomenology inform and change our protocol. However, later, and I will get to this in a minute or so, we realized that we actually didn't have to change the protocol, but rather we had to change our own analytical position to get at the relational and mediating effects. So in this case, we deployed the table non-table with a participant couple who were professional designers. And this is where Cheeky and Chewy come in, another interesting pet encounter during our field study. So for a short time, our participants took the table non-table as a rat toy. The pet rats engaged with the table non-table in interesting ways, taking sheets off of it, dragging them around, building nests, chewing on it, and the cable. But our participants who had this trained background in user-centered design and happen also to be minimalists were very quickly and firmly, seemingly rejecting the table non-table. So we realized that the way we were trying to study mediations was problematic and also quite the challenge to figure out with something like the table non-table. And in this last deployment, there was definitely a learning curve of trying to do this post-phenomenological informed study of this kind of research artifact. So basically, the problem was that post-phenomenology mainly analyzes readily available use-centered technologies retrospectively, like the mediation of the ultrasound technology. And then here we are with this novel artifact that also totally breaks with our common technological assumptions, but still exists in the real world and can be experienced and studied. So we had to take this into account and shift away from mainly a human-centered orientation in our ethnographic work. we had to overcome a strong focus on useful use by our participants and look at our study more holistically. So we had to change our own analytical perspective. We still had a keen sense that postphenomenology could support this endeavor because it emphasizes a more encompassing understanding of technologies with the relations coming about with them. So ultimately, altogether, the design of the table on table, our participants' quick seeming rejection of it, and in turn, our own analytical perspective change, through that, the relations we have with things, we learned that the relations we have with things and technologies may not solely be based on or begin with use. As soon as an artifact becomes part of a home, whether in front of a fireplace or underneath a bed, it shapes a new reality and it mediates people's existence and experience, regardless of the perception of its usefulness. And there is a variance of mediations that go much beyond purely interaction. So by actively looking beyond use-centeredness, we were able to detect that the table-on-table mediates between humans and the world, even though it's seemingly useless and it ended up maybe in the closet. And this made clear why the artifact or human-centered approach of our earlier studies did not bring up the mediating effects, or maybe they hid them. Well, in the paper, we actually, in the end, we give a postphenomenological account of the table-on-table, describing its background relation and its mediating effects. But these two images from the beginning and the end of the last study actually illustrate this shifting position really well. So the left picture is from the very beginning of the study, and it was posted by our participants. And the last one was when we picked up the table-on-table and how we found it. And so as researchers, we tend to be drawn to the left where there's so much happening and data is generated, and it doesn't really help that the participants are presenting it to us that way. But the right picture ended up being far more powerful to us because something that we realized through our analytical position change, even though the table-on-table was in the closet, technological mediation was still at work, just like with the other things in the closet. So to wrap this presentation up, through our reflexive account of our research to design process and the underlying interplay, we offer a step towards better understanding how theory shapes and is informed by the practices of design research. The deployments were very important to provide actual realities with our research artifacts. But our analytical perspective as researchers changed over time. So for us, we believe we made progress in our investigations around designing and studying beyond use or functionality. And our work points to more opportunities, for example, more post-phenomenology in HCI, but more broadly, the need for more critically reflective accounts of the practice of design research. Merci.
Can I invite questions, please?
Okay, thank you very much. This mic is really low. That was really interesting, and it made me wonder about, because my work was about the impact of technology on everyday life and practice theory, and the table non-table is sort of not integrated into practices, and it doesn't seem to have much effect there for like longer term effect on everyday life or on how social practices shape. But then I thought actually it does, because it has had so much effect in design and HEI practice. So have you done any reflection on that, how it has shaped, like also beyond your own?
Beyond my own practice? Oh, how it's...
Yeah, because it has been published and discussed so much.
Well, so one thing I'm thinking about, well, it always depends. So from a post-phenomenological point of view, it really depends on the unique situations. Like, okay, the table on table is here and it creates a human technology world relation. Like there's it's very situational. And so there's all these different situations where I could talk about, yeah, here it became part of a practice, or it created mediation, like it had an effect. And it certainly had one on us. So that's an entirely different mediation. And then, I mean, we also made an Instructables tutorial, so for anyone to make a table on table and I guess have a mediation with it, or have it mediate their lives. Yeah, I think the opportunities are endless with the table on table.
Yeah, but do you have like an idea of how it's been cited and affected other work?
How has it affected other work? I don't have a very good answer to that right now.
I think it could be interesting to know
Yeah.
another way of looking at like what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think a lot of people are intrigued by it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for this one last question. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the interesting talk. Yeah, it's really interesting to see kind of the historical perspective, and since you mentioned this kind of thing-centered view and versus human-centered view, I was wondering if you studied the mediation between non-humans, or if you imagine how that could look like without the human-technology equation.
I'm sorry, how there could be a mediation with non-humans, like pets?
Yeah, well, you mentioned pets, but I wonder, like, I don't know, even thinking about, things with things, or, different entities, like, I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm really still trying to understand things from like a human perspective, but try to not do, take on a very utilitarian idea of a human perspective, like try to like get a bigger picture. I mean, certainly I could talk about more of like how, pets, like the animals are non-humans, and they interacted with the table on table, and they had like an entirely different set of mind interacting with it. They didn't care whether it was a useless research artifact or however you want to call it. The cats just right away took to it. I do have a story where my own cat experienced the table on table, and then later on went and took that experience to other objects that were kind of similar looking, like a heater that was also a square thing with the cable, and then started staring at it thinking, it's gonna move. I know it's gonna move because that thing is moving. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Can we congratulate Sabrina on her presentation again, please? And if you have any questions for any of the speakers in this session, they'll be here for a few more minutes. So if you'd like to come to the front and have a conversation, that would be great.